In Houston's towering Lakewood Church, a smiling preacher with a flawless image was about to face the one man no spotlight could outshine. What began as a televised sermon on faith and positivity turned volatile when celebrity collided with conviction and pride made the first move. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical faith guest or motivational partner. For 50 years he was a soldier, martial arts champion, and spiritual warrior, known for turning violence into discipline and silence into command. When Joel Osteen's confidence snapped and his hand struck out, he had no idea he was testing the patience of a man trained to conquer chaos without striking back. Norris's calm deflection wasn't just self-control, it was a mirror held to the soul of every man hiding behind performance, and it unleashed a moral aftershock that would echo across the nation. What began as a faith event built on inspiration would become a reckoning broadcast live to millions, and the stage that once promised prosperity would crumble beneath the weight of truth, humility, and a single act of restraint. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Lakewood Church gleamed like a fortress of faith under the Houston Sunday. Once a basketball arena, now a cathedral of hope, its massive structure housed over 16,000 souls that Sunday evening. Outside, LED screens, the size of billboards, flashed the words, "Inner Strength Summit," while drone cameras captured the lines snaking around the building. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. 28-year-old Ethan Cruz found himself swept along with the crowd, his worn Chuck Norris t-shirt hidden beneath a button-down. 6 months after losing his father, he still carried grief like a stone in his chest. He'd come seeking something. Direction. Purpose. The kind of strength that didn't crumble when life turned cruel. "Can you believe this place?" a woman next to him whispered as they found their seats. "It's bigger than where the Rockets play." Ethan nodded, taking in the sea of faces, the massive stage, the production value that rivaled any concert he'd attended. Projection screens showed close-ups of audience members, their expressions expectant, hungry. The countdown timer on the screens showed 3 minutes until the program began. In the production booth overlooking the sanctuary, Marcus Hale adjusted his headset and scanned the bank of monitors before him. At 42, he'd produced everything from morning shows to presidential debates, but nothing quite like this. Faith-based programming was where the real money was, especially when you had Joel Osteen's smile lighting up the screen. "We're at capacity," his assistant reported. "Social engagement numbers are already breaking records." Marcus nodded, tapping commands into his console. "The online viewers are pushing 7 figures," he muttered. "And that's before our surprise guest. This is career gold, Amy." Backstage, Rebecca Osteen smoothed her husband's already perfect collar, noticing the tightness around his eyes. After 20 years of marriage, she could read Joel's tension in the subtle clench of his jaw. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nervous?" she asked. Joel Osteen shook his head, that famous smile clicking into place. "Just focused. This event needs to be perfect. People are counting on me to deliver." Rebecca hesitated. Chuck Norris arrived early. "He's in the green room." Joel's smile flickered for just a moment. "Good. Good. Does he understand the format?" "He's here to amplify my message, not overshadow it." "Joel," Rebecca said softly, "he's a guest, not a prop." The warning lights flashed, and Joel squared his shoulders, becoming the polished, camera-ready version of himself. "It'll be fine. Everything happens for a reason, right? That's what we tell people." As Joel strode toward the stage, Rebecca watched him go, a flutter of unease settling in her stomach. She'd noticed it more lately, the gap between Joel's message and the man. The way celebrity had begun to seep into his faith, turning humility into a performance rather than a practice. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. On cue, music swelled something triumphant with soaring strings and a driving beat. Spotlights crisscrossed the stage as Joel Osteen bounded out, arms raised in greeting, that million-dollar smile dazzling under the lights. "Houston," he called, his voice amplified to reach the highest balconies. "What a beautiful night to celebrate the strength God has placed inside each and every one of you." The crowd erupted. Phones lifted to capture the moment. Ethan found himself caught up in the energy despite his skepticism. There was something undeniably magnetic about Joel, a polished charisma that made you want to believe. "Tonight is about finding the champion within," Joel continued, pacing the stage like a motivational conductor. "About recognizing that you, yes, you were built for more than the struggles trying to hold you down." For 40 minutes, Joel wove a tapestry of anecdotes and scriptures, each one reinforcing his message of positivity and prosperity. The audience responded with amens and applause, riding the emotional wave he crafted. Marcus, watching from the booth, tracked the engagement metrics climbing ever higher. "Perfect," Marcus murmured. "Now bring out Norris." Joel paused mid-stride, letting anticipation build. His smile widened as he gestured toward the side of the stage. "Now, family, I've brought someone special to help us understand what true inner strength looks like. A man who embodies discipline and faith. Please, welcome the legend himself, Chuck Norris." The crowd exploded. Ethan felt his heart leap into his throat as his childhood hero walked onto the stage. No dramatic entrance. No music swell. Just a man older now, but still solid. Still carrying himself with that unmistakable quiet confidence. Chuck Norris moved to center stage with measured steps, dressed simply in dark jeans and a button-down shirt. Where Joel bounced with energy, Chuck stood grounded. Where Joel commanded with volume, Chuck captivated with stillness. They shook hands, Joel with enthusiastic vigor, Chuck with measured firmness. Joel clapped Chuck on the shoulder as if they were old friends. "The man, the myth, the legend," Joel announced, playing to the crowd. "I grew up watching your films, sir. We all did." Chuck smiled, gentle, authentic, and nodded his appreciation to the audience. When he finally spoke into the microphone, Joel handed him. His voice carried without needing to be loud. "Thank you for having me," he said simply. "It's an honor to be in God's house tonight." The contrast was immediate and striking. After Joel's hurricane of words and movement, Chuck's calm felt like walking into still water. The audience settled, leaning forward slightly, as if collectively recognizing that this man would not shout for their attention, his presence alone commanded it. In the production booth, Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Zoom in on Joel's face," he instructed the camera operators. "I want to see his reaction." On the monitors, Joel's expression flickered between admiration and something harder to name. Something that looked almost like discomfort as he momentarily ceased being the brightest star on stage. "Chuck has graciously agreed to share his journey of faith and strength," Joel announced, gesturing for Chuck to take the spotlight. "A journey that parallels what I've been teaching you all these years." Rebecca, watching from the wings, caught the subtle way Joel positioned himself, not as a student of Chuck's wisdom, but as its equal. She saw, too, the almost imperceptible arch of Chuck's eyebrow at the comparison. "Before we begin," Joel continued, "I thought we might show a highlight reel of some of Chuck's greatest moments, both on screen and in his ministry work." The screens lit up with clips: Chuck's legendary fight scenes, his charity work, his public statements of faith. The crowd cheered at each iconic image. During this display, Chuck stood quietly, hands clasped before him, his expression that of a man who had long ago learned that public adulation and private worth were separate currencies. When the video ended, Joel returned to Chuck's side, still beaming that flawless smile. "Amazing legacy," Joel said. "Simply amazing. Now, Chuck, tell us, what does inner strength mean to you?" As Chuck took the microphone, Ethan leaned forward in his seat. This was why he'd come to hear wisdom from a man who seemed to embody the strength his father had admired. "Inner strength," Chuck began, his voice measured and thoughtful, "isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about standing firm when life hits you." The crowd murmured approval. Joel nodded enthusiastically, though something flickered behind his eyes. A momentary recognition that Chuck's definition carried a weight his own carefully crafted phrases sometimes lacked. "That's powerful," Joel interjected quickly. "Reminds me of my book chapter on resilience." "If I may," Chuck continued gently, not quite interrupting but not yielding the floor either. "True strength is often quietest when it's most powerful. It doesn't need to announce itself." A ripple of appreciation moved through the audience. On his monitor, Marcus noticed Joel's smile tighten almost imperceptibly. The producer leaned forward, sensing a shift in the event's energy. "Something's happening," he murmured to his assistant. "Stay on both their faces. Don't miss a thing." On stage, Joel placed a hand on Chuck's shoulder, reclaiming the audience's attention with a laugh that sounded only slightly forced. "And that's exactly why I wanted Chuck here tonight," Joel said. "To remind us that strength can look different than we expect. Now, let's talk about how that strength connects to prosperity and breakthrough." But as Joel attempted to steer the conversation back to familiar territory, Chuck's steady gaze never wavered. And in the front row, Ethan Cruz felt the first stirrings of something unexpected, the sense that beneath the polished surface of this inspirational summit, fault lines were beginning to form. Rebecca Osteen, watching from the wings, wrapped her arms around herself, a prayer forming silently on her lips. She could feel it, the subtle tension building between two very different kinds of strength. And something told her that before this night was over, everyone would see which one truly endured when tested. The conversation flowed smoothly at first, a choreographed dance of platitudes and inspiration. Joel would pose a question about discipline or faith. Chuck would respond with measured wisdom, and Joel would reframe the answer to align with his prosperity message. The audience, captivated by the presence of both men, seemed not to notice the subtle tug-of-war happening between them. But Rebecca saw it. From her position in the wings, she caught every micro-expression that crossed her husband's face, the tightening around his eyes, when Chuck received spontaneous applause, the way his gestures became more expansive, as if physically trying to reclaim the stage. "He's getting rattled," she whispered to no one in particular. On stage, Joel paced with practiced energy. "You know, Chuck, you've faced so many opponents in your career, both in films and in your martial arts competitions. How do you prepare mentally for those challenges?" Chuck considered the question carefully. "I prepare by remembering that my greatest opponent is always myself, my own ego, my own fears. External challenges are just reflections of internal battles." The audience nodded appreciatively. Ethan found himself leaning forward, recognizing a truth his father had tried to teach him before cancer took him too soon. "Absolutely," Joel jumped in. "That's what I tell people every Sunday. Your mind is where the battle is won or lost. That's why positivity and prosperity thinking are so powerful. When you see yourself as blessed and highly favored." "With respect," Chuck interjected gently, "I think there's a difference between positive thinking and true inner peace. One is about what we want from the world. The other is about accepting what is, even when it's difficult. A murmur rippled through the audience. In the control booth, Marcus Hale straightened in his chair, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "Camera 3, stay tight on Joel's face," he directed. "Camera 2, on Chuck. Don't miss anything." Joel's smile remained fixed, but a slight flush crept up his neck. "Well, of course acceptance is part of the journey," he said with a laugh that didn't quite land. "But God wants abundance for us. He wants us to thrive, not just survive." Chuck nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But I've found that authentic strength often emerges most clearly in loss and limitation, not in abundance." The words hung in the air. For Ethan, they landed like a revelation, a permission to find meaning in his grief, rather than just pushing past it. Joel's rhythm faltered slightly. This wasn't how the conversation was meant to go. He glanced toward the wings, catching Rebecca's eye. She offered an encouraging nod, but he saw the concern behind it. "Let's bring this to something practical for our audience," Joel said, recalibrating. "Chuck, you've been in incredible success films, TV shows, business ventures. How does faith play into that success?" It was a redirection, a way to steer back to Joel's comfort zone of achievement and prosperity. But Chuck didn't follow the expected script. "Success?" Chuck repeated, his expression thoughtful. "I've been blessed with opportunities, certainly. But I've failed far more than I've succeeded. Those failures taught me more than any success." He paused, looking out at the audience with genuine connection. "My faith isn't about what I've achieved. It's about who I am when everything is stripped away. When the cameras aren't rolling. When no one is watching." The implication hung in the air. Unspoken, but unmistakable. In a church built on spectacle, Chuck had just quietly suggested that true faith existed beyond performance. Joel's smile tightened. "Well said. Very well said." He cleared his throat. "That reminds me of a story I often share." "If I could add something," Chuck said, his tone respectful but firm. "Sometimes our greatest ministry isn't in what we say, but in how we respond when challenged. Words are easy. Living them is harder." The audience applauded spontaneously, earnestly. It wasn't the polite, prompted response they gave to Joel's familiar catchphrases, but something deeper, authentic. In the production booth, Marcus leaned toward his microphone. "Did you hear that? He's calling Joel out." Subtly, but he's doing it. His assistant nodded, transfixed by the monitors. "Joel sees it too. Look at his face." Indeed, Joel's expression had shifted. The camera caught it perfectly. The momentary falter in his smile. The flicker of something that might have been irritation or even anger before the professional mask slid back into place. "Powerful insight," Joel recovered, though his voice carried a new edge. "And speaking of challenges, let's talk about discipline. Chuck, you're famous for your workout regimen and martial arts practice. How does physical discipline connect to spiritual strength?" It was a deliberate pivot away from authenticity and back to something showy, something that played to images rather than substance. Chuck seemed to recognize the maneuver. His eyes, kind but penetrating, held Joel's for a beat longer than comfortable. "Physical discipline is just a tool," he answered. "What matters is the intention behind it. Are we training for appearance or function? Are we concerned with how strong we look or how strong we actually are?" The question lingered. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the subtext. From his seat, Ethan watched the interaction with growing fascination. He'd come expecting inspiration, Instead, he was witnessing something raw and real, a collision of philosophies disguised as friendly conversation. On stage, Joel's body language had changed. His movements became more assertive, his voice slightly louder, as if trying to reclaim authority through volume. "Appearance matters too, though," Joel countered with a theatrical gesture to the audience. "We're ambassadors for Christ. When people see success and excellence, they're attracted to our message." Chuck nodded slowly. "There's truth in that. But I've found that people are most drawn to authenticity, to moments when our masks slip and they see our genuine struggles. Perfect appearances create distance. Shared humanity creates connection." The words settled over the audience like a gentle rebuke. In that moment, something shifted in the room. A collective recognition that they were witnessing more than a dialogue. They were seeing a fundamental clash of world views. Rebecca sensed the tension building. She caught the eye of one of the stage managers, silently asking if they should cut to the next segment. The manager shrugged, equally uncertain. In the control booth, Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is gold," he whispered. "Pure gold. Don't you dare cut away." On stage, Joel tried again, his voice now carrying an unmistakable edge beneath the smile. "Well, Chuck, you've certainly maintained your image well over the years. The Chuck Norris brand is legendary." "I don't think much about my brand," Chuck interrupted, the gentleness in his voice making the contradiction even more pointed. "I focus on my character. One is for public consumption. The other is who I really am." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The implication was impossible to miss. Joel's smile became fixed, his eyes no longer matching the expression on his lips. He glanced at the confidence monitor, then back at Chuck with a forced chuckle. "Character matters." "Absolutely. That's what I was saying earlier about—" "Sometimes," Chuck said quietly. "Words aren't enough, Joel." The statement hung in the air like a thunderclap before silence. Simple. Direct. Unadorned. The audience's reaction was immediate, a collective intake of breath, followed by an uncomfortable shuffle of movement. Some exchanged glances. Others looked down at their programs. A few nodded in solemn agreement. Ethan felt a chill run up his spine. In 5 simple words, Chuck had distilled the discomfort he'd always felt sitting in megachurches, like this one, the nagging sense that something was missing beneath the polish and production. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the wings, Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. She'd seen the warning signs building, had felt the tension mounting, but even she hadn't expected such a direct challenge. From his control booth, Marcus Hale grabbed his assistant's arm in excitement. "Did you hear that?" he hissed. "Did you hear what he just said to Joel Osteen on his own stage?" On the stage itself, Joel stood frozen for a moment, the professional smile still plastered on his face, but his eyes now sharp, with something that looked dangerously close to anger. The mask was slipping. "Well," Joel said, his voice tight but controlled, "we all express our faith differently, don't we? My calling is to uplift, to inspire, and you do it well." Chuck acknowledged with a nod. But inspiration without foundation crumbles when real storms come. Another ripple through the crowd. Another moment of tension stretching taut between the two men. Joel's hand tightened visibly around his microphone. The cameras caught it all, the whitening of his knuckles, the slight tremor in his perfectly manicured fingers. "Let's talk about your foundation then," Joel said, his voice carrying a challenge now. "You've built quite an empire yourself. Films, television, fitness equipment, books. All temporary. Chuck replied evenly. All things that will fade. What remains is how we treat people when the spotlight is off. How we handle power. How we respond when challenged. The emphasis on that last word was subtle but unmistakable. A direct acknowledgement of what was happening between them. Joel's professional demeanor cracked further. His next words came out sharper, the veneer of friendliness wearing dangerously thin. And how exactly do you respond when challenged, Chuck? With all that martial arts training, I imagine it's quite decisive. The question carried a barb. The first openly combative move in what had until now been a subtle sparring match. Chuck met Joel's gaze steadily, unruffled by the provocation. True strength is knowing when not to strike, he replied. Anyone can react with force. Restraint is the harder path. Restraint. The words seemed to hover in the air between them. A virtue being simultaneously described and demonstrated. Joel's jaw tightened visibly. He turned to the audience with a too broad smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, folks, I think we're getting a little philosophical here. Let's bring this back to practical advice for your daily lives. May I finish my thought? Chuck asked, his tone polite but firm. Joel hesitated, caught between social grace and growing irritation. The audience watched, collectively holding their breath. Of course, Joel said finally, the words strained through his smile. Thank you. Chuck turned to address the audience directly. The strongest person in any room isn't the one who can force others to bend. It's the one secure enough to bend themselves. To listen. To change course when needed. True power isn't in dominating others, it's in mastering yourself. The words resonated through the massive space. In his seat, Ethan felt them land like truth, the kind his father would have nodded along with. Simple. Unvarnished. Real. The audience applauded spontaneously and earnestly before Joel could respond. It wasn't the prompted, polite applause of earlier, but something genuine. Something earned. And in that moment, watching the reaction, something shifted in Joel's expression. The mask slipped further, revealing not just irritation now, but something deeper. A flicker of insecurity. Perhaps even fear. Rebecca saw it from the wings and took an involuntary step forward. She knew her husband knew the pressure he placed on himself, the carefully constructed image he maintained. She recognized the warning signs of his composure fraying. In the control booth, Marcus sensed it too. Stay tight on Joel, he instructed his camera operators. Something's building. I can feel it. On stage, Joel regained the microphone, his movements now slightly too sharp. His famous smile strained at the edges. Well, there's wisdom in that perspective, he acknowledged, though his tone suggested otherwise. But let's remember that Jesus himself showed righteous anger when needed. Sometimes strength means taking a stand. True, Chuck agreed. But Jesus' anger was never about protecting his ego or reputation. It was about protecting others, especially the vulnerable. The distinction hung in the air, implicit but clear. A line drawn between ego-driven reaction and principle-driven response. Joel's composure slipped another notch. The audience could see it happening in real time, the carefully maintained veneer beginning to crack under pressure. Are you suggesting I'm operating from ego, Chuck? Joel asked, a dangerous edge entering his voice. Chuck met his gaze steadily. I'm not suggesting anything about you specifically, Joel. I'm sharing what I've learned through my own failures and struggles with pride. The diplomatic answer did nothing to diffuse Joel's growing agitation. If anything, Chuck's calm seemed to intensify it, highlighting the contrast between them. Because it sounds like you came to my church, to my event, to lecture me, Joel continued, the pretense of casual conversation now completely abandoned. Which seems like its own kind of pride, doesn't it? A collective gasp rippled through the audience. In his seat, Ethan sat up straighter, sensing the shift from philosophical tension to personal confrontation. Rebecca stepped fully into view at the edge of the stage now, catching Joel's eye and giving a slight shake of her head, a silent plea for restraint. But Joel either didn't see her or chose to ignore the warning. Chuck remained unruffled. I came because you invited me, Joel. To share honestly about strength. That's what I'm doing. And you think you're stronger than me? Joel pressed, his voice rising slightly. Is that what this is about? The question hung in the air, naked and raw. The audience stirred uncomfortably. This wasn't the polished, uplifting event they'd expected. Chuck's expression showed the first hint of concern not for himself, but for Joel, for the situation unfolding in front of thousands. This isn't about comparing ourselves to each other, Chuck said carefully. That's the opposite of what I've been trying to say. But Joel had crossed some internal threshold, had moved from controlled irritation to something more volatile. His next words came out sharp, pointed. It's easy to lecture about humility when you're Chuck Norris, isn't it? When your whole identity is built on being the toughest guy in the room? The accusation was both unfair and revealing a projection of Joel's own insecurities rather than an accurate assessment of Chuck's demeanor. In the control booth, Marcus was practically levitating with excitement. Are you getting this? He demanded of his team. Tell me you're getting all of this. On stage, Chuck took a measured breath, his expression compassionate rather than offended. Joel, he said quietly, maybe we should take a break. Collect our thoughts. The suggestion reasonable, gracious, seemed only to fuel Joel's agitation. To the watching audience, the contrast was stark. Chuck growing calmer as Joel grew more visibly frustrated. We don't need a break, Joel insisted, his voice carrying a challenge now. We're having an honest conversation about strength, aren't we? That's what you wanted. Chuck glanced toward Rebecca in the wings, a silent question in his eyes. She stepped forward, ready to intervene. But Joel cut her off with a gesture. Let's make this practical, Joel continued, turning back to Chuck with an intensity that made the audience shift uncomfortably. Show us what real strength looks like, Chuck. Not just words. Actions. A dangerous line was being crossed. Everyone in the room could feel it. The escalation from philosophical disagreement to personal challenge. Chuck remained still, his posture relaxed but alert. I think we're demonstrating different kinds of strength right now, Joel, he said evenly. And that's valuable for everyone watching. The diplomatic response seemed to frustrate Joel further. He stepped closer to Chuck, the pretense of casual conversation completely abandoned now. You know what I think? Joel said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. I think it's easy to judge from the outside. To come into someone else's house and critique, to play the wise master while others do the hard work of inspiring people week after week. Chuck started to respond, but Joel pressed on, his words coming faster now, driven by something deeper than the immediate disagreement. Do you know what it's like to carry the spiritual weight of millions? To have every word scrutinized? To be the face people look to for hope? Joel's voice rose, the strain evident. You get to be the action hero. I have to be perfect. Never doubt. Never falter. Never show weakness. It was a startling moment of vulnerability, a glimpse behind the carefully maintained facade. For a brief moment, the audience saw not the polished television pastor, but a man buckling under the weight of his own public image. In the silence that followed, Chuck's expression softened with genuine compassion. "Joel," he said quietly, "that burden sounds exhausting, but it's one you don't have to carry." The gentleness in his voice, the absence of judgment, seemed to hit Joel harder than any criticism. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or a moment of clarity. But it was quickly subsumed by the momentum of his emotional state. "Don't patronize me," Joel snapped, the words echoing through the sound system. "Not in my own church." The audience stirred uneasily. This wasn't the uplifting, inspirational event they'd come for. This was something raw, unscripted human frailty, exposed beneath bright lights. Rebecca moved decisively now, stepping onto the stage with a practiced smile. "I think this might be a perfect time for a short break," she announced, her voice warm but brooking no argument. "Our worship team has a beautiful song prepared." "No." Joel's rejection was immediate and firm. He turned back to Chuck, something challenging in his stance now. "We're having a conversation about strength, about walking what you talk. Isn't that right, Chuck?" Chuck met Joel's gaze steadily, his expression neither intimidated nor antagonistic. Just present, centered. "Sometimes strength is knowing when to pause," Chuck suggested quietly. "When to step back and reflect." "And sometimes," Joel countered, stepping even closer to Chuck, "strength is standing your ground. Isn't that what you've built your whole reputation on?" The tension in the room was palpable now. Rebecca looked toward the production booth, making a cutting motion with her hand, a signal to Marcus to intervene, to cut to commercial, to do something. But Marcus, sensing historic television unfolding before him, pretended not to see. On stage, the two men stood facing each other. Joel vibrating with barely contained emotion, Chuck still and centered. The contrast could not have been more stark. "You've made quite a living teaching people how to fight," Joel continued, his voice carrying an edge that made the audience shift uncomfortably. "Why don't you show us what that looks like? Right here. Right now." It was a shocking escalation. Beyond philosophical disagreement, beyond personal irritation, into direct provocation. Chuck shook his head slightly. "That's not why I'm here, Joel. And it's not what these people came for. Isn't it?" Joel pressed, gesturing to the crowd. "Aren't they curious what would happen if the famous action star had to use his skills in real life?" "I know I am," the audience murmured, uncertain how to respond. Some looked embarrassed, others fascinated. Ethan felt his stomach tighten with discomfort. Chuck remained unmoved, his calm unshaken. "What exactly are you asking for, Joel?" Joel stepped closer still, close enough that the audience could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. His next words emerged through gritted teeth, his voice low but picked up clearly by the microphone. "I'm asking if you're as tough as the legend says, or if it's all just camera tricks and careful editing." The challenge hung in the air, impossible to misinterpret. Rebecca stepped forward again, her expression a mixture of shock and dismay. "Joel," she said, her voice carrying a warning. "That's enough." But Joel wasn't listening anymore. He was caught in the grip of something that had been building for longer than this evening, perhaps for years. The pressure of perfection, the strain of always being on, the exhaustion of maintaining an unblemished image, in one fluid motion, shocking everyone in the room. Joel raised his hand and pushed against Chuck's chest, not hard enough to hurt, but unmistakably aggressive. A physical crossing of the line that had been brewing throughout their conversation. "Show me," Joel demanded, his voice tight. "Show me this restraint you're so proud of." A collective gasp rose from the audience. Phones lifted higher, recording the unthinkable scene unfolding. In the control booth, Marcus sat forward, wide-eyed with disbelief and dark excitement. "Are you getting this?" he hissed to his team. "Tell me we're getting every second of this." On stage, Chuck looked down at Joel's hand, then back up at Joel's face. His expression wasn't angry. If anything, it carried a profound sadness, compassion for the unraveling happening before him. "This isn't you, Joel," Chuck said quietly. "This isn't who you want to be." The simple statement, delivered without heat, seemed to fuel Joel's agitation further. His hand still against Chuck's chest, he leaned closer. "You don't know me," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You don't know what I deal with. What I carry." Chuck nodded, acknowledging the truth in this. "You're right. I don't. But I recognize the look of a man fighting himself harder than he's fighting anyone else. I've seen it in the mirror." For a brief moment, something shifted in Joel's expression. A flash of recognition. Perhaps even gratitude for being truly seen. But the momentum of his emotional state was too strong to halt. With a movement that seemed to surprise even himself, Joel drew back his hand and swung at Chuck Norris. The blow never landed. In a movement so fluid it appeared almost casual. Chuck shifted slightly to the side. Joel's swing found only air, the momentum carrying him forward awkwardly. For a suspended moment, the pastor stood unbalanced, arm extended. The physical manifestation of the inner disequilibrium that had brought him to this point. Throughout the massive sanctuary, 16,000 breaths were held. Phones captured everything in high definition, their glowing screens like stars against the darkened audience. In the production booth, Marcus Hale whispered a single word, half prayer and half profanity, as he realized he was witnessing a career-defining broadcast. Chuck's hand moved then not to strike back, but to steady Joel by the elbow, preventing him from stumbling. The gesture was almost paternal, filled with a compassion that made the moment even more devastating to watch. "Breathe, Joel," Chuck said quietly. His voice picked up by the microphones, but intended only for the man before him. "Just breathe." The gentleness in those words seemed to break something loose in Joel. He straightened, eyes wide with the dawning horror of what he'd just done. What he'd just attempted in front of thousands of witnesses and countless cameras. Rebecca was moving now, crossing the stage with purpose, but Joel raised a hand to stop her. His face had drained of color, the famous smile nowhere to be seen. In its place was something raw and exposed, a man confronting the gulf between his message and his actions. Joel began, then stopped, searching for words that wouldn't come. The silence stretched painfully. The audience remained frozen, collectively processing what they'd just witnessed. Joel Osteen, the smiling face of modern faith, the polished purveyor of positivity, had just taken a swing at Chuck Norris on his own stage during a live-streamed event about inner strength. Ethan Cruz sat motionless, his emotions a tangle of disappointment and fascination. The man he'd come to hear, the voice of optimism and achievement, had just revealed the limits of his own philosophy in the most public way possible. On stage, Chuck released Joel's elbow, giving him space but remaining present. His eyes held no judgment, only a steady compassion that seemed to cut deeper than any rebuke could have. "I apologize," Joel finally managed, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. He addressed Chuck directly, not playing to the audience for once. I don't know what came over me." Chuck nodded once, accepting the apology with simple dignity. "Pressure reveals what practice has prepared us for," he said quietly. "We all have breaking points." The words weren't meant to shame, but they carried a weight that settled over the sanctuary. In that moment, Chuck wasn't an action star or martial artist. He was simply a man standing in truth, uncomfortable but necessary. Joel swallowed hard, glancing out at the stunned faces of his congregation. For years, He had preached breakthrough and victory. He had promised them that faith would make them unshakable. Yet, here he stood, thoroughly shaken. "I think," Rebecca said, stepping forward with gentle authority, "we should take that break now." She gestured to the worship leader, who nodded quickly and began moving toward the piano. But Joel shook his head, something resolute forming in his expression. "No," he said, his voice rough but steadying. "No more performances. No more deflections." He turned to face the congregation directly. "You all came here tonight expecting inspiration," he said, the words emerging with difficulty. "Instead, you've witnessed my failure, my hypocrisy." A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the Joel Osteen they knew, the polished, positive figure who never acknowledged doubt or darkness. This was someone unfamiliar, raw, unfiltered. In the production booth, Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from excitement to something more complex. I don't even know what this is anymore," he muttered. "On stage," Joel continued, his voice gathering strength, not from confidence now, but from a newfound authenticity. "For years, I've told you all that faith makes us strong. That belief shields us from weakness." He glanced at Chuck, then back to the audience. "But I think I've been getting it wrong." The admission hung in the air, shocking in its humility, devastating in its implications. Thousands of people sat in stunned silence as their spiritual leader publicly questioned the foundation of his own teachings. "The message was supposed to be about inner strength tonight," Joel said, gesturing toward Chuck. "And I think we've all just learned what that really looks like. It's not in aggression. It's not even in success." His voice broke slightly. "It's in restraint. In the strength to face your own failures without running from them." Chuck remained quiet, his presence steady but unobtrusive. This moment belonged to Joel, a reckoning years in the making. From his seat, Ethan watched with a mixture of disappointment and reluctant respect. The pedestal had crumbled, the idol had fallen, but in its place stood something potentially more valuable, a human being, struggling toward authenticity. "I owe you all an apology," Joel continued. "But especially," he turned to Chuck, meeting his eyes directly. "I owe you an apology, sir. You came here as my guest, and I treated you as a threat. Because deep down, I think that's how I've come to see anyone who challenges me. As a threat to the image I've built." Chuck nodded once, the simple gesture conveying both acceptance and understanding. In the wings, Rebecca wiped at her eyes, a complex mixture of emotions playing across her face. Grief for the public humiliation her husband was experiencing, but also a quiet pride in his courage to face it directly. "I don't know what happens next," Joel admitted, addressing the congregation again. "I don't have a 5-point plan or an uplifting conclusion. For once, I'm standing before you without a script, without certainty. All I know is that I need to be honest with myself, with all of you, and with God." The silence that followed was profound. A collective breath held, a moment of genuine spiritual reckoning that no production value could have manufactured. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single voice called out, "We're with you, Pastor Joel." Others joined in, not with blind adoration or performative enthusiasm, but with something more valuable: authentic support in a moment of human frailty. Joel stood still, visibly moved by the response. For perhaps the first time in years, he wasn't performing for his congregation. He was connecting with them. Chuck stepped forward then, placing a hand lightly on Joel's shoulder. "This," he said, his voice carrying easily through the microphone still clipped to his collar, "is what real strength looks like. Not never falling, but having the courage to get back up, to face the truth of who we are, flaws and all. The words settled over the sanctuary, like a benediction. In that moment, the Inner Strength Summit delivered on its promise, though not in the way anyone had expected. Marcus, watching from the production booth, finally found his voice again. "Cut to commercial," he instructed. Though his tone lacked its earlier excitement, "but save every frame of this footage. Every single frame." As the broadcast switched to a pre-recorded segment, Joel turned to Chuck. Their microphones now off, but their images still visible to the live audience. "I don't know how to come back from this," Joel admitted quietly. Chuck's expression was kind but unflinching. "Maybe you don't come back," he suggested. "Maybe you move forward instead, as something more honest than before." The words hung between them, a challenge and an invitation. Around them, the massive sanctuary buzzed with energy as thousands of people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Some sat stunned. Others leaned close to neighbors in urgent conversation. A few had already taken to social media, their thumbs flying across phone screens. What none of them realized not yet was that they had just witnessed something more powerful than the inspirational message they'd come for. They had seen the beginning of a transformation. The first painful steps of a journey from image to substance. And in his seat, young Ethan Cruz felt something unexpected taking root. Not the blind admiration he'd come seeking, but something more valuable. The understanding that true strength lived in the gap between failure and redemption. In the courage to fall publicly and get back up anyway. The lesson his father had tried to teach him all along. The commercial break created a surreal pause, a suspended moment between the public unraveling they had just witnessed and whatever would come next. In the sanctuary, the atmosphere crackled with tension and uncertainty. 16,000 people remained in their seats. Phones clutched in hands, messages flying across social media platforms as the unprecedented moment spread beyond the church walls. Backstage, Joel stood with Rebecca and Chuck in a small circle, their conversation shielded from the audience but intense in its urgency. Joel's shoulders were slumped. The confident posture of America's most famous pastor, replaced by the bearing of a man confronting the wreckage of his carefully constructed image. "We can end it here," Rebecca was saying, her hand on Joel's arm. "No one would blame you after what just happened. We can issue a statement later, once you've had time to process." Joel shook his head slowly. His face, usually animated with that trademark smile, looked years older under the harsh backstage lights. "No," he said. "Running away would just confirm everything people already think about the performative nature of what we do here." He glanced toward the stage, where the countdown clock showed 45 seconds until they were live again. "I need to see this through." Chuck, who had remained largely silent during their exchange, nodded slightly. "Whatever you decide," he said, "know that how you respond now matters more than what just happened." Joel met his eyes, searching for judgment, but finding only steady compassion. "Will you come back out there with me?" he asked, the question carrying a vulnerability that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. Chuck considered this. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "No," Joel admitted with a humorless laugh. "What I want is to rewind the last 30 minutes of my life. But since that's not an option, yes. I think finishing what we started is the only path forward." In the control booth, Marcus was hurriedly restructuring the broadcast, his earlier excitement replaced by a producer's pragmatic focus on salvaging the event. "We'll bring them back on together," he instructed his team. "No music intro, no flashy graphics. Just the two of them, continuing the conversation. This is real now, let's not dress it up." His assistant nodded, eyes still wide from what they'd witnessed. "This is either the end of Joel Osteen's career," she murmured, "or the beginning of something completely new." Marcus glanced at her. "Either way, we're the only ones with this footage. Every network in the country will be calling us within the hour." Back in the sanctuary, Ethan sat forward in his seat as the house lights dimmed again, signaling the resumption of the broadcast. Around him, people whispered urgently to one another, speculation flying about what would happen next. The usual polished veneer of the Lakewood experience had been stripped away, leaving something raw and unpredictable in its place. The stage lights rose slowly. No dramatic music accompanied the return of Joel and Chuck. They simply walked out together, side by side, and took seats in two chairs that had been arranged center stage. Joel's transformation was visible even from the back rows. Gone was the energetic pacer, the animated hands, the performer who commanded the stage like a conductor. In his place sat a man humbled, still in his expensive suit, but somehow diminished, or perhaps more human. The silence stretched for a long moment as Joel seemed to search for where to begin. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its usual practiced cadence. "I want to thank you all for staying," he said simply. "I know what just happened was unexpected, shocking, even. It would have been completely understandable if you'd chosen to leave." He glanced at Chuck, then back to the audience. "I've spent my entire career telling people how to live victorious lives, how to overcome obstacles through faith and positive thinking. And there's value in that message. I still believe that." Joel paused, visibly gathering himself. "But tonight, I realized something about myself, something I've probably known deep down but refused to acknowledge. I've become so invested in the image of perfection that I've forgotten how to be authentic. How to be simply human." The audience was utterly silent, collectively holding their breath as they witnessed something unprecedented. Joel Osteen, speaking without polish, without performance, just raw truth. When Chuck spoke about true strength coming from restraint, from mastering yourself rather than dominating others, something in me rebelled against that truth, because it exposed the gap between what I preach and how I've been living. Joel's voice roughened. "I've been dominating with positivity, with certainty, never allowing doubt or struggle to show." Chuck sat quietly beside him, his presence supportive but not intrusive. This was Joel's journey to navigate. "The irony," Joel continued with a pained laugh, "is that I just proved Chuck's point about true strength in the most public way possible, by demonstrating its opposite." He turned to Chuck then, addressing him directly, though his words were still captured by the microphone. "What happened next, though your response, that's what I think we all need to talk about. That's the real lesson here." Chuck nodded slightly, encouraging Joel to continue. "For those who couldn't see clearly from your seats," Joel said, turning back to the audience, When I swung at Chuck," he stumbled over the words, the admission painful. He could have responded in kind. He had every right to. Instead, he chose restraint, control, the very strength I was challenging. In the audience, Ethan leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding moment. This was why he'd come, not for polished platitudes about strength, but for its real demonstration. Not in aggression, but in how one responded to it. "Chuck," Joel said, "I think everyone here would benefit from understanding exactly what happened in that moment. The choice you made. Because that was the real demonstration of strength we all needed to see." Chuck considered the request carefully before responding. When he spoke, his voice carried the calm certainty of a man comfortable in his own skin. There wasn't really a choice to make, he said simply. After 50 years of martial arts training, my body responded before my mind even processed what was happening. But the response wasn't to strike back. It was to neutralize without harming. He demonstrated with his hands, the movement slow and deliberate. A simple redirection, creating space, maintaining balance while allowing you to find yours again. The explanation was technical, but the metaphor wasn't lost on anyone listening. The counter wasn't a counterattack, Chuck continued. It was a counterbalance. In martial arts, we learn that the strongest response is often the one that uses the least force necessary. Not to dominate, but to restore harmony. The words settled over the sanctuary, carrying a weight that transcended the physical demonstration. In his seat, Ethan felt something click into place, a lesson his father had tried to teach him about strength being measured not by force exerted, but by force restrained. Joel nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom in Chuck's words. I came at you with ego, he acknowledged. With pride. With the need to maintain an image even at the cost of truth. And I responded with acceptance, Chuck said. Not of the action, but of the humanity behind it. We all have moments when our worst selves emerge. The question is, what do we do next? The question hung in the air, a challenge, and an invitation not just to Joel, but to everyone listening. Joel took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the massive sanctuary. I don't have a neat answer to wrap this up with, he admitted. No 3-point sermon to make everything better. All I know is that I need to be honest about where I am. About the gap between what I preach and how I live. His voice strengthened with genuine emotion rather than performative passion. And maybe that's where real strength begins. Not in pretending to have it all together, but in admitting when we don't. Not in never falling, but in how we get back up. The words resonated through the space, not with the polished certainty of Joel's usual declarations, but with something more valuable. Authentic struggle toward truth. Chuck nodded. A simple acknowledgement of respect for Joel's willingness to face himself publicly. The counter that matters most, he said quietly, isn't what happened physically between us. It's the counter to pride, humility. The counter to performance, authenticity. Those are the moves that take the most courage. Something shifted in the atmosphere of the sanctuary. A collective release of tension. A shared exhale. What had begun as shocking confrontation was transforming into something unexpected. A genuine moment of spiritual reckoning. In the production booth, Marcus watched the monitors with an expression of wonder. We're not producing this anymore, he murmured to his assistant. We're just witnessing it. On stage, Joel turned to Chuck, his expression carrying a vulnerability rarely seen in public figures. I owe you an apology, he said. Not just for what happened earlier, but for bringing you here under false pretenses. I didn't invite you to share your wisdom. I invited you to enhance my brand, to be a prop in my production. The admission clearly cost him, but he pushed through. And when you refused to play that role, when you spoke truth instead, I reacted with anger instead of gratitude. Chuck's response was simple but profound. Apology accepted, he said. Then, after a brief pause, now, what will you do with this moment, Joel? This is either an ending or a beginning. The choice is yours. The question hung between them. A challenge wrapped in compassion. An invitation to transformation. Joel was silent for a long moment, visibly processing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new quality, a tentative authenticity, replacing his usual certainty. I think, he said slowly, I need to stop hiding behind positivity. Behind prosperity. Behind perfection. He looked out at the congregation, his expression stripped of its usual calculated charm. I need to start being honest about my own struggles, my own doubts, my own failures. A murmur moved through the crowd. Not disapproval, but recognition. A collective response to hearing someone speak not from a pedestal, but from shared human experience. Perhaps, Chuck suggested gently, that's the message people truly need. Not that faith makes us invincible, but that it gives us the courage to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to fail and rise again. Joel nodded, something shifting in his expression, a weight lifting, replaced by the first glimmers of genuine peace. That's a message I can stand behind, he said. Because it's true. Because I've lived it and am living it right now. In front of all of you. He turned to address the congregation directly, his voice gathering strength not from showmanship now, but from newfound conviction. I don't know what this means for the future, for this ministry, for my role in it. But I know that whatever comes next has to be built on truth, not performance. On authenticity, not image. The words resonated through the massive space, a declaration that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Throughout the sanctuary, people began to rise to their feet. Not in the orchestrated response of earlier, but in genuine, spontaneous support. In his seat, Ethan stood with them, something unexpected swelling in his chest. He had come seeking inspiration from strength displayed. He was finding it instead in vulnerability embraced. In the courage to fall publicly and rise again with truth. Chuck rose from his chair then, extending a hand to Joel. Not in challenge this time, but in solidarity. Joel took it, rising to stand beside him, humbled but undefeated. Different, but perhaps stronger, in ways that mattered more. This, Chuck said quietly, though the microphone carried his words to every corner of the sanctuary, is what true power looks like. Not never falling, but rising again with greater wisdom than before. As the two men stood together on stage, the action hero and the fallen pastor, the master of physical discipline and the student of spiritual authenticity, something profound was communicated without words. True strength isn't found in perfect performance, but in the courage to embrace imperfection. Not in dominating others, but in mastering oneself. The counter that shook the stage wasn't Chuck's physical response to Joel's attack. It was the counterintuitive truth that real power often looks like vulnerability embraced rather than weakness denied. And as the sanctuary erupted in applause, not the polite, prompted response of religious routine, but the genuine recognition of authentic humanity, that truth continued to ripple outward. Through the cameras broadcasting live to millions, through the phones capturing and sharing the moment, through the hearts of everyone witnessing transformation unfold in real time, including a young man named Ethan Cruz, who had come seeking answers about strength and was finding them in the last place he expected. In the space between failure and redemption. In the gap between who we pretend to be and who we truly are. The very lesson his father had lived. Right until the end. By dawn, the video had gone viral. Number Osteen swings and number Norris counter dominated every social platform. Morning shows replayed the clip endlessly, Joel's building tension, the swing, Chuck's calm response, and most compelling, the raw authenticity that followed. Some called it career suicide. Others hailed it as the most genuine moment in modern religious broadcasting. Ethan Cruz woke to a phone buzzing with notifications. Friends who knew he'd attended bombarded him with questions. He scrolled through the reactions, watching the incident being dissected from every possible angle. The memes had already begun, most finding humor, but some capturing the profound lesson beneath. True strength isn't in the swing. It's in the counter. Chuck Norris sat in meditation in his hotel room. Phone deliberately turned off. After 50 years in public life, he had learned that peace came from within, not from external validation. His wife Gina entered with tea and a gentle smile. "It's quite a storm out there," she said. "Every network wants an interview." "And how do you see it?" Chuck asked, valuing her perspective above all others. Gina considered this. "I think something important happened last night. Something beyond the spectacle. You created space for transformation, for authenticity." Chuck nodded. "The question now is what Joel does with that space." Across Houston, in the Osteen residence, Joel sat surrounded by evidence of his success awards, best-selling books, photographs with celebrities. Rebecca stood by the window, phone in hand, her expression grave. "The board wants an emergency meeting," she reported. "Several major donors have called." "The network is concerned about the messaging inconsistency." Joel nodded absently, his attention on his tablet where reactions continued flooding in. For someone who had built a career on public perception, the tsunami of commentary should have been devastating. Yet something had shifted inside him, the thing he had feared most had happened, and somehow he was still breathing. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asked. Joel was quiet before responding. "I'm thinking about something my father used to say. That a crisis is just a crossroads viewed up close." He set the tablet aside. "For 20 years, I've been telling people that faith shields us from storms. What if I've been wrong? What if faith is what helps us weather the storms, not avoid them? The question is whether people want to hear that message from you," Rebecca said. "Whether they'll trust you after last night." Joel nodded. "I guess we'll find out." At Lakewood Church, the administration buzzed with frantic energy. Marcus Hale paced the production suite, fielding offers for the exclusive footage that had become the most discussed religious moment in recent memory. "CNN is offering 6 figures just for the unedited tape," his assistant reported. "Fox and MSNBC are in a bidding war." Marcus shook his head, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. The producer in him recognized the opportunity. But something else tugged at him, a sense of witnessing, something sacred that perhaps shouldn't be commodified. "Tell them all, we're considering options," he said finally. "This is bigger than ratings." His assistant raised an eyebrow. "You feeling okay, boss?" Marcus stared at the freeze frame on his monitor, Joel and Chuck, standing together. Vulnerability and strength, captured in a single image. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I think I just remembered why I got into this business in the first place." Across the city, Ethan sat staring at the business card Chuck Norris had somehow slipped into his hand after the event. A personal number was handwritten on the back. "If you want to talk about real strength, call me. CN." Before he could decide whether to call, his phone lit up with a news alert. "Joel Osteen announces special service in response to viral incident. Time for truth, pastor says." Social media exploded with speculation. Some predicted a carefully crafted apology to salvage his brand. Others wondered if this would be Joel's resignation. Tickets, though free, were claimed within minutes. Ethan secured a seat, driven by a need to see this story through. Whatever happened tonight would shape not just Joel's future, but potentially the conversation around faith, authenticity, and public persona in the digital age. As evening approached, the atmosphere outside Lakewood Church felt markedly different. Gone were the elaborate lighting displays and promotional banners. The mood among those waiting was subdued, expectant, less like attendees at a show and more like witnesses to a reckoning. Inside, Marcus had been given clear instructions. No special effects. No dramatic lighting cues. No worship band warm-up. Just a single chair and microphone on stage. He wants it stripped down completely, Marcus explained. Just him and the truth. Phones were collected at the door, an unprecedented move that sparked both protest and respect. Tonight would not be filtered through screens and selective editing. Whatever happened would be experienced directly, collectively, in real time. At exactly 7 o'clock, with no introduction, Joel walked onto the stage. The transformation was immediately apparent. Gone was the designer suit, replaced by simple slacks and an open-collared shirt. Gone, too, was the practiced smile. In their place was something both less polished and more compelling. A man stripped of pretense. Joel took the chair, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the packed sanctuary. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply absorbing the magnitude of the moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its usual performance quality. "Thank you for coming," he began simply. "I know many of you are here out of concern. Others, out of curiosity. Some, perhaps, to witness what you think will be the end of something." He paused. "You might be right. This may very well be the end of something, but I hope it's also the beginning of something better, something truer." Throughout the sanctuary, people sat in rapt attention, sensing they were witnessing not a rehearsed speech, but a genuine reckoning. "For 20 years, Joel continued, I've preached a gospel of victory, of prosperity. And there's truth in that message. God does want us to thrive. But in my focus on the destination, I think I've failed to honor the journey. The struggle, the doubt, the very human process of falling and rising again." The words hung in the air, unadorned by musical underscoring or dramatic pauses. Just raw truth. "Last night, many of you witnessed my very public failure," Joel acknowledged. "I could blame stress or pressure, but the truth is simpler. I lost sight of the difference between performing faith and living it." Throughout the sanctuary, people sat utterly still as they witnessed something unprecedented. A prominent pastor, not spinning failure, but stepping fully into its truth. "I don't know exactly what comes next," Joel admitted, his voice gaining strength from honesty rather than certainty. "I just know it has to be different. It has to be real, even if that means being honest about my struggles and doubts." As he spoke, something shifted in the atmosphere. A collective exhalation. The polished veneer of megachurch experience had been stripped away, leaving something both more fragile and more genuine in its place. "I don't have 3 points and a poem tonight," Joel said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Just this truth. I'm on a journey. Same as you. Imperfect. Still learning. But committed to something real, even when it's messy." As Joel stepped away from the microphone, the sanctuary remained silent for a long, suspended moment. Then, from somewhere in the middle section, a single person stood. Then another. And another. Soon, people throughout the massive space were on their feet, not in orchestrated response, but in genuine acknowledgement of the courage it took to stand in such vulnerable truth. From his position near the back, Ethan rose with them, something unexpected unfolding in his chest, not blind admiration, but a deeper respect for the messy, imperfect journey toward authenticity, the very journey his father had modeled, right until the end. 1 week later, Lakewood Church was transformed. Gone were the theatrical lighting effects and branded banners. The massive screens remained dark. Even the seating had been rearranged, creating a more intimate setting despite the venue's scale. The atmosphere pulsed with something different from the usual pre-service excitement, a collective holding of breath before diving into uncharted waters. Ethan Cruz found his seat near the front, having received a personal invitation from Joel's office. The past week had been transformative conversations with Chuck about strength and authenticity. Hours reflecting on his father's legacy, and a growing sense that what had begun as spectacle was evolving into something genuinely significant. Rebecca Osteen moved through the congregation, greeting people with quiet warmth. Her eyes held a complex mixture: concern for her husband, hope for what might emerge from crisis, and steady faith that had weathered the storm of public scrutiny. In the back, nearly unnoticed, Chuck Norris slipped in with his wife. He wore nothing flashy, just a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He nodded when recognized but made no grand entrance, taking a seat like any other attendee. At precisely 11 o'clock, without musical introduction, Joel walked onto the stage. The transformation that had begun the previous week was even more apparent, not just in his casual attire or absence of his trademark smile, but in something more fundamental. A quality of presence that seemed grounded, authentic. He approached the simple wooden podium that had replaced his usual sleek lectern. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the faces before him. "Good morning," he began, his voice carrying none of its usual performative enthusiasm. "Thank you for being here. Especially those who have questions, those who are uncertain, those who came expecting answers I might not have yet." The honesty in those last words, the acknowledgement of his own uncertainty, set the tone immediately. "I've spent the past week in deep reflection," Joel continued. "Reading your messages, praying, listening more than speaking for once." A small, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "It's amazing what you hear when you finally stop talking." A gentle ripple of laughter moved through the congregation. Not mockery, but recognition. "I'm not here today with a polished message," Joel said. "I'm here with something both simpler and harder. Truth." He paused, gathering himself. "For years I've preached a gospel of victory and breakthrough, of God wanting the best for us: prosperity, success, abundance." Joel's voice remained steady, though the cost of his words was evident in his expression. "And I still believe God wants us to thrive. But I think I've misunderstood what true abundance looks like." From his seat, Ethan watched intently, struck by the humility in Joel's demeanor. This wasn't damage control. This was genuine reckoning. "True abundance," Joel continued, "isn't measured in material success or perfect circumstances. It's found in authenticity, in the courage to be real with ourselves, with each other, and with God, even when that reality includes struggle, doubt, and failure." The words hung in the air, unadorned by musical underscoring. Just truth, offered without performance. "Last week, you witnessed my very public failure," Joel acknowledged. "Not just in losing control, but in the gap between what I've preached and how I've lived. Between the image I've projected and the reality beneath it." He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the congregation. "I could tell you, I've had a revelation, that I understand everything perfectly now." Joel shook his head. "But that would just be another performance. The truth is, I'm at the beginning of a journey, not the end. I have more questions than answers right now. And I think that's where authentic faith begins." Throughout the sanctuary, people sat utterly still, witnessing something rare in religious leadership. A prominent pastor, not spinning failure, but stepping fully into its implications. "What I do know," Joel continued, "is that I'm done hiding behind perfection, behind carefully scripted messages and camera-ready smiles. I want to build something real with you, a community where we can be authentic about our struggles while still holding on to hope." From his seat, Chuck watched with quiet approval. Not the satisfaction of having won their confrontation, but the recognition of witnessing genuine transformation. "I want to thank Chuck Norris," Joel said, as if sensing his presence. "Not just for his grace in that heated moment, but for showing me what true strength looks like. It isn't found in never falling, it's found in how we rise after we fall." Heads turned until they located Chuck. He acknowledged the words with a simple nod. "I'm sorry," Joel said, his voice quieter now, "for the times I've presented faith as a formula rather than a relationship, for offering certainty when I should have acknowledged mystery, for creating a culture where appearance mattered more than authenticity." The words settled over the sanctuary, not as theatrical self-flagellation, but as honest acknowledgement. "I don't know exactly what comes next," Joel admitted. "But I know it has to be different. It has to be real, even when reality is messy and complicated." He stepped away from the podium, moving to the center of the stage. "I'd like to invite Chuck to join me, if he's willing," Joel said. "Not for any dramatic reconciliation, but because I think his wisdom is something we all need right now." After a moment's consideration, Chuck rose and made his way to the stage with quiet dignity. The two men stood facing each other, so different in background and approach, yet connected now by something profound, a shared understanding of true strength. Joel extended his hand. Chuck took it, the handshake simple and genuine. "Thank you," Joel said quietly, "for showing restraint when I showed none, for demonstrating what I should have been teaching all along." Chuck nodded, his expression serious but compassionate. "We all have moments when emotion overwhelms wisdom," he said. "What matters isn't the fall. It's what we learn on the way back up." The words resonated through the sanctuary, not as pithy platitude, but as hard-won truth. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, remembering his father's similar philosophy during cancer treatment. "It's not about never falling, son. It's about how you get back up." "In 50 years of martial arts," Chuck continued, "I've learned that the strongest opponents aren't those who never lose balance. They're the ones who know how to regain it quickly, who turn vulnerability into opportunity." He turned to Joel, his expression direct but kind. "What I witnessed wasn't just failure, it was the beginning of something authentic. And that takes more courage than any fight I've ever faced. The question now," Chuck said, "is whether we treat this as a momentary scandal to move past, or as the foundation for something more authentic. Something that acknowledges that real faith includes doubt. Real strength includes weakness." Throughout the sanctuary, people leaned forward, captivated by simple truth, in a space that had too often prioritized spectacle. "I don't have a neat sermon to wrap this up," Joel concluded, his expression no longer carrying the weight of performance. "All I can promise is that I'm committed to the journey to building something authentic. It won't be perfect. There will be missteps, but it will be real." Throughout the sanctuary, people rose to their feet, not in orchestrated response, but in genuine recognition of the courage such vulnerability required. Ethan stood with them, something unexpected unfolding in his chest. Not blind admiration, but something more valuable. Respect for the messy, imperfect journey of becoming real, of falling publicly and rising again with truth. The very journey his father had modeled in those final months, valuing authenticity over appearance, right until the end. As the congregation stood, their applause, not the practiced enthusiasm of religious entertainment, but the genuine recognition of truth spoken without performance. Something profound was communicated. True redemption isn't found in never falling, but in the courage to rise again with greater wisdom than before. Not in maintaining a perfect image, but in embracing authentic humanity, flaws, doubts, struggles and all. Not in performing faith for others, but in living it honestly, even when the journey includes moments of weakness and failure. The counter that had shook the stage wasn't just Chuck's physical response. It was the counterintuitive truth that emerged. Real power isn't found in domination but in restraint. Not in never falling, but in rising again with greater wisdom than before. A truth that would continue to ripple outward, transforming not just one man or one ministry, but potentially the conversation around faith itself in a world hungry for something beyond performance. Something authentic. Something real. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.